Pro-democracy legislators in Hong Kong earlier this week, 15 members resigned en masse. The move was a show of solidarity with 4 of their colleagues who were kicked out of the legislature by Beijing in an effort to quash dissent. The pro-democracy movement in the former British colony has been under sustained attack since Beijing imposed sweeping national security laws earlier this year. For more on this latest move, I'm joined by Gloria Fung. She's the president of Canada-Hong Kong Link, a nonprofit organization that focuses on human rights and the rule of law in Hong Kong. She is in Toronto. Thanks for joining us, Gloria.
Thank you very much for having me today.
So these 15 pro-democracy legislators resigned after 4 of their colleagues were kicked out. But Beijing calling their actions acts of betrayal of the country. What do you think of their decision to resign?
Well, the councillors who resign are protesting the disqualification of 4 other legislative councillors. The disqualification was ordered by the National People's Congress in Beijing, and the Communist Party interference in the governance of Hong Kong violates an international treaty, the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And clearly, the Communist Party wants absolute control of Hong Kong, and the one country, two system principle is completely dead.
Well, now that these 15 have left, and plus the other 4, this leaves the Legislative Council there being mostly pro-Beijing politicians. So what impact could this have on the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong?
Well, absolutely, there won't be any more dissident voice in the legislative body. But when proper channels of parliamentary participation are completely blocked, the civil movement may have no other option but to go back to the streets and may become more radical. And actually, the Communist Party will probably also disqualify district board councillors and liberal judges. And there will be further crackdown on independent media, especially internet media. And therefore, the international Hong Kong support movement, as well as activists who have fled the board, such as Nathan Law, will play a much more important role in the future as the voices of the Hong Kong movement.
You mentioned going to the streets. A year ago, that's what we were seeing, these mass protests in the streets. But now that the pandemic is still happening, what ways do you see or avenues do you see for people to express their dissent and take action?
Well, presently under the social distancing requirement in Hong Kong, and especially under the new national security law, there's not really a lot of room for civil movement in Hong Kong at the moment. However, I understand that the people in Hong Kong are still determined to safeguard their core values of freedom, rule of law, democracy, and human rights in Hong Kong. So sooner or later, they will come back to the streets to have their voices heard.
You've been talking with people in Hong Kong. What are you hearing from them?
Well, they are under a tremendous atmosphere of white terror now, meaning whatever they do, even for people who are walking on the street, they could be randomly arrested by the police. And so there's not really much room for them to have their voices heard. And that also applies to media. I understand that a lot of foreign correspondents' work permit application has been denied by the Hong Kong authority. And so there will be challenges for international media to get access directly to information in Hong Kong in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Gloria, just quickly, I just wanted to get your thoughts on Canada's decision this week. The Canadian government, sort of in response to the events of the week, announced new streams for asylum seekers in Hong Kong to be able to immigrate here to Canada. What do you make of that? And do you want to hear something else or more from Ottawa?
Well, we comment on Canadian government's new immigration policy as being the first step to address the critical situation in Hong Kong. However, it is more like an immigration policy to attract the best and the brightest segment of Hong Kong immigrants, but it is not a humanitarian policy that address directly to Hong Kong people who are truly under risk of political persecution. And therefore, we will continue to advocate for a widened policy to accommodate people who need refuge in Canada, but who are from a wider spectrum of age group, educational background, and experience. And so we still need to work harder on the government to make sure that it addresses directly to the urgent need of people from Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us, Gloria. Gloria Fung is the president of Canada Hong Kong Link, and she joined us from Toronto.